The Fish by Elizabeth Bishop. Ernest Hemingway had said, "Man can be destroyed but never defeated." The Fish by Elizabeth Bishop actually celebrates the undying or indomitable spirit of any living being and endows its struggles with a sense of dignity. Though at the beginning of the poem, man and nature are presented as opposite poles, towards the end of the poem both are united in their shared spirit of dignity and the fight for survival. The poet recognizes the various battles of the fish and respects it for its spirit in the face of adversity. Let us look at the various features of Bishop's poetry. Critics like Larry Roter in the New York Times has referred to her as one of the most important American poets of the 20th century. We can find descriptive features where she goes on to describe nature or a landscape and then goes on to a reflective mode, where she asks the readers not to focus on her but with her. There's also the eye for detail, as Robert Lowell says. I don't think anyone alive has a better eye than she has. As a painter, she grabs scenes in her poetry visually, and you can also find the predominant use of visual and kinetic imagery where, with her kinetic imagery, the movements are not expressed for their own sake, rather, they use to enhance or reflect on the theme of the poem. We also find the themes of self-discovery and moments of heightened awareness, where, especially in the fish, in the end there's a kind of heightened awareness where the poetess recognizes the fish also as a companion species and releases the fish towards the end of the poem. Her poetry is also marked by a conversational tone and she uses repetition for emphasis. The fish. I caught a tremendous fish and held him beside the boat, half out of water with my hook, fast in a corner of his mouth. He didn't fight. He hadn't fought at all. He hung a grunting weight, battered and venerable and homely. Here and there his brown skin hung in strips, like ancient wallpaper, and its pattern of darker brown was like wallpaper. At the beginning of the poem, the poet talks of a fishing trip in a rented boat. She succeeds in catching a tremendous fish and pulls him half out of the water with a fishing hook lodged firmly in the corner of his mouth. The fish does not fight. Instead, he merely hangs limply on the line, thereby giving a chance to observe him more closely. And as the poet observes him, she finds that his skin is ragged and peeling. It is battered, it is ragged and is peeling, and it is homely or ugly. And yet to her it is venerable, worthy of respect, because being battered is a sign of struggle and experience and therefore worthy of respect as according to her. She says that his skin was hung in strips like ancient wallpaper, simile, and its pattern of darker brown again was like wallpaper, simile. The skin of the fish is described as ancient wallpaper, indicating again the age of the fish. It is stained and it has lost its color owing to age. She continues with this description in the next lines also, as she says the patterns on the skin were like full-grown roses, stained and lost through age. He was speckled with barnacles, fine rosettes of lime. Rosettes are patterned on the skin shaped like roses. Lime refers to the alkaline substance that grows over time with chemical reactions. So she is actually speaking about the patterns that have taken shape on his skin. And he was speckled or spotted with barnacles. Barnacles are sticky little crustaceans that stick onto the host, and the idea that he was infested with barnacles again attests to the age or proves that a fish was an aged one. It was also infested with tiny white sea lice, and underneath one could find 2 or 3 rags of green weed, unwanted plants hanging down, while his gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen. The oxygen is not terrible here. Therefore, again, this is an instance of transferred epithet. Rather, it is the situation that does not provide the fish with oxygen that is terrible. Rather, it is the efforts of the speaker to catch the fish that is terrible. So, here we have another instance of transferred epithet of what we call hyperlegy. And then the frightening gills, fresh and crisp with blood. His gills seems frightening as they were red and crisp with blood, also reflecting the fresh wounds. Some of the wounds were so deep that the poet could actually see the entrails or the parts inside, that is, the gills that can cut so badly, meaning the gills that were so fragile to violence, so fragile and vulnerable to violence. I thought of the coarse white flesh. The coarse white flesh of the fish was packed in like feathers. Another simile. The big bones and the little bones, the dramatic red and blacks of his shiny entrails. His inner part, I told you that the wounds were so deep that his inner parts could be seen, and the inner parts are termed as dramatic red and blacks. This is another instance of transferred epithet, as the red and blacks are not dramatic, rather the effects that they create are dramatic. And then the poet, she compares this bladder like a big peony, a big flower. Simile again here. I looked into his eyes, which were far larger than mine, but shallower and yellowed. The irises backed and packed with tarnished tinfoil, seen through the lenses of old scratched isinglass. The eyes of the fish are also tarnished like tarnished tinfoil, owing to various abrasions or scratches on the surface of the eyes. The fish's eyes are shallow not only physically but lack depth, and the poet tries to establish some kind of communication. You can see that the fish does not return the poet's stare. So as he explains that this whole scenario, as it is seen through the lens of old scratched isinglass. Isinglass is a thin, transparent, jelly-like substance, and this lens can be the perspective either of the fish or either of the onlooker. And here again we have the juxtaposition of both these perspectives, again juxtaposing the perspectives of the human and non-human world. The poet says that the fish's eyes shifted a little, but they did not return his stare. So though he tries to establish some kind of communication through his eyes, it is futile. Rather, the fish's eyes shifted more like the tipping of an object toward the light. It was only like a response to stimuli. Just like a plant with the phenomena of phototropism moves towards light. I admired his sullen or grim face, the mechanism of his jaw, and then I saw that from his lower lip, if you could call it a lip, grim, wet and weapon-like, hung 5 old pieces of fish line. So what catches the poet's admiration the most were 5 old pieces of fish line hanging from his jaw. She says that it is either 4 fish lines or either 4 and a wire leader with the swivel stell attached. So all these are fishing parts of fishing apparatus that is still stuck onto the jaw of the fish with all their 5 big hooks grown firmly in his mouth. I don't know how far this is probable, but either she actually refers to hooks or more probably to the wounds caused by these 5 big hooks that has grown firmly in the fish's mouth. Now, the hooks of the fish line had created wounds in the fish's mouth that grew along with the fish physically and spiritually and endowed the fish with a kind of wisdom. And this is why she says in the next they like medals with their ribbons because they held testimony to the victory of the fish over man, and and therefore it was like a 5-haired beard of wisdom as these wounds grew physically and spiritually and endowed with the fish with a kind of wisdom. The poet compares the fish lines to 5 medals with their ribbons because that was a testimony to her courage, the courage of the fish, and his victory over man. And it is also testimony to the fact that in 5 times in the struggle between nature and man, nature had won. And it is these 5 lines of fish lines that are mentioned here, a green line frayed at the end where he broke it, the fish, during the struggle. Then there was one green and then 2 heavier lines and then a fine black thread still crimped or curled from the struggle of this from the strain of the struggle and snap where it had broken and the fish had got away. So as a poetess, finally she beholds these 5 medals with their ribbons. These 5 fish lines, they appear to her like medals with the ribbons, and she is totally in awe. And finally, she comes, as I told you earlier, there is a heightened sense of awareness. And she says, I stared and stared, and victory filled up the little rented boat from the pool of bilge, pool of garbage, where oil had spread a rainbow. So, as the poet's knowledge of the fish translates into wisdom, she finally releases the fish. And victory fills up the rented boat as it is victory for the fish and also a victory for the poet in her realization. So the poet describes everything as rainbow, rainbow, rainbow. Rainbow is a symbol of hope. Rainbow is also a symbol of diversity that the poet respects towards the end of the poem and releases the fish. The fact reflects hope also for the planet Earth in the preservation of the biodiversity of the Earth. Thus, the poem celebrates both the spirit of the fish and the poet. The oil had spread a rainbow, and you can see a rainbow around the rusted engine. The rusted engine probably refers to the old rusted anthropomorphic thoughts, to the baler, the bucket that is orange due to the rust, the sun cracked thwarts, the seats that have cracked due to the heat of the sun, the oarlocks on their strings, the gunwales, the edges of the ships, the boat, the edges of the boat, until everything was rainbow, rainbow, rainbow. And rainbow hope was everywhere, and I let the fish go. Thus, the poem is written from a critical post-human perspective, in that it counters human exceptionalism that humans are the only unique creatures, and it also counters human instrumentalism in that the idea that humans control the world. So, it finally gives us the lesson that man is just another companion species, as both the man and the fish are united in the struggle for survival and their undying spirit.